Hi everyone, welcome to Crime Time. Today we have a really special guest who I've been trying to get in here for a while. Tom Mesereau is with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Allison.
Tom has an incredible history of trying really high profile cases, including the sexual molestation case in which Michael Jackson was acquitted. In, I guess, 2005, was it?
Yes.
Okay, it's 2005, right. And Mike Cavaluzzi is here, criminal defense attorney, and now co-host.
Nice to be here.
We've given, Mike has a new title. He's a co-host today. So we're going to be talking to Tom about his different cases. But first of all, Tom, I wanted to start off with talking to you about Michael Jackson. You originally met with the Jackson family to talk about bringing a case against AEG. Is that correct?
What I met with them about was hiring Brian Panish as their lead counsel. Randy Jackson, who's a friend of mine who wanted me to defend his brother and was very instrumental in my defending his brother in the criminal case in 2005, he called me and wanted to know what I thought about plaintiffs' lawyers in Los Angeles. And I told him in no uncertain terms that I thought Brian Panish was far and away the best plaintiff's civil trial lawyer in America, and I told him that no one else in Los Angeles came close to Brian Panish. When I told that to Randy, he asked me to meet with Brian Panish, who I'd met before briefly, at his office to discuss the case. I did that, then Randy again wanted to know my impressions. And I told him this guy is the best. Brian Panish is #1 in Los Angeles, #1 in America, nobody comes close, hire him. I then met with Katherine Jackson, Randy's mother, of course, at Janet Jackson's apartment. And she wanted to know what I thought of lawyers, she wanted to know what I thought of the case, and I told her that hire Brian Panish, he's the best. And she did that, and I think she has the best lawyer to handle this case that she could possibly have hired.
Well, what did you tell her you thought of the case?
Well, I didn't tell her a lot about the case. I mean, I did not know a lot of the evidence at the time. I knew something. I thought there may be a problem with AEG because my impression of AEG at a distance, without looking at all the documents, was that they were desperate to enter into a business agreement with Michael Jackson.
How long after Michael's death did they first approach you about even the possibility of pursuing a civil case?
Boy, I'd have to think back. I'm not sure exactly when it was. I know Randy was suspicious of AEG's role in the Conrad Murray matter. And the question was, AEG these are sophisticated business people. These are people who are used to taking big risks for big returns. The question was, did they assume responsibility for Conrad Murray? And I had a suspicion they probably did to get this concert tour going. And then, of course, Brian was hired. His firm started doing discovery. And as we've seen, I think through the reporting, and I have not been in the courtroom, I'm not allowed in the courtroom, I'm on the plaintiff's witness list, is that there are emails and documents which, in my opinion, conclusively show that they assumed the risks for Conrad Murray, that they wanted Conrad Murray to know they were paying his bills, and that they had control over him. And I think they took the risk. I think it may have backfired on them, and they're trying to wiggle out of it now, and I don't think they'll be successful at that because I think the plaintiffs have a strong case.
When you first met with the Jackson family, were they determined that they wanted to pursue a lawsuit, or were they questioning whether or not they wanted to do that?
Well, my understanding was that Randy, particularly, who's very bright and knows legal issues very well, as I said, Randy wanted me defending his brother in the criminal case. He wanted Garagos fired. He thought Garagos was incompetent. Got me into it, kept me in the case when people were trying to attack who the defense lawyer was. He's very shrewd, and he knows the legal system, and he's a smart guy. And I think he had a lot of suspicions right away as to why was Conrad Murray involved, who was he listening to, who was telling him what to do, and Randy wanted all this investigated.
The reason why I ask is because, I mean, you and I both know, and I'm often approached by clients as well who want to pursue civil litigation, and we both know that there are huge collateral considerations when you're making that decision, aside from whether or not you could win the case and get money. You have to consider Michael Jackson's kids, emotionally what it means. It's a very draining, very frustrating, very emotional event going to trial like that. And were the Jacksons conscious of that in your mind? I mean, what this would do to the kids, what this would do to just even the reputation at large, that it might feel to some people that it's a money grab?
Well, I think Brian Panish is the one to ask those questions to, because Brian Panish has interacted with the family on that level. in a very intense way. I don't think Brian Panish would have taken the case if he didn't think this was a strong case. He's a very smart plaintiff's lawyer. But look, unless you stand in a mother's shoes, unless you stand in children's shoes, you don't know what the loss of the father means. You don't know what they're willing to do to see justice done. And if Catherine, the mother, and the 3 children want to pursue justice against AEG, that's their privilege as far as I'm concerned.
Well, here's what I think what Mike is talking about is the fact that all of the sexual molestation trial has come up again, and we even have a new plaintiff who originally testified that, you know, the choreographer.
Well, I called him as a witness, my first witness in the defense case.
Also, though, we have Paris Jackson. We have Paris Jackson, who clearly has had an emotional breakdown, whether it's due to this trial. It certainly happened in the middle of the trial, and there is certainly some argument that it may be that this has all become very emotionally overwhelming. And I do agree with you that Catherine Jackson is in the position to make this decision of whether or not to go forward. The kids are young, though. The kids are the ones that I would be most concerned with. Is this really in their best interest?
I think Catherine is in a better position to make that decision than anyone else. And Catherine, a loving, devoted mother, Michael thought she walked on water. He thought she was a saint. He described her as a saint in the book he wrote. She knows what's best, in my opinion. And if Catherine thinks it's best for she and the children and the family to go forward with this case, that's her privilege and that's their privilege. She lost a loving son and they lost a loving father. And I mean, he was a loving father. I've never seen a better father in my life. I watched the way he interacted with these children. He loved them. They were his whole life. He used to call me at 3 and 4 in the morning during the criminal trial. And the one thing he was concerned about was not himself, it was his children.
Let's talk about the criminal trial, because we were briefly discussing it before, and the issue of drug use. And you spent a lot of time with Michael Jackson, during that trial. There were allegations during the trial when he showed up in his pajamas that he was wasted, that he was taking a lot of medication during the trial. And frankly, going through a criminal trial is really, really difficult for defendants, especially when your whole life is on the line like that.
Well,
but I wondered what the situation was.
First of all, I would expect anyone in a situation like that, going through what was a 5-month trial, but we thought was going to be 7 to 8 months at the beginning. I would expect anyone in that position to have sleep problems, depression problems, anxiety problems, and I would expect them and encourage them to get treatment if they needed it. So I assumed Michael was suffering from all of those issues, as anyone else would have, and if he was taking some prescription medication, that was his privilege. I never saw him take any medication, and he never was inarticulate or uncooperative with me. He was a delightful client to deal with. He always was there to cooperate, to answer questions, to provide insight and information. He was one of the nicest clients I have ever had the privilege to represent.
Did you advise during that time that he seek medical attention for depression, for anxiety?
I never did.
So you didn't note those things in him at that time?
No, I didn't. Okay. Verdict day, he looked terrible. He looked like he hadn't slept.
That's expected.
That's
a scary day.
He looked like he hadn't slept. He looked emaciated. He was obviously worried about his children, worried about his future. That day was probably the worst he looked during the entire trial, but he always was cooperative, articulate, professional, a delightful client to work with. I've never had a better one in my career.
Were you worried that day?
Well, I was certainly anxious.
But did you think? What did you think?
To be honest with you, Allison, I thought when I heard there were verdicts on every count, they were going to be not guilty. I didn't think you would get 12 of these jurors to convict on anything. I had more faith in some of them than others based on what I had picked up during the trial, and that isn't really worth that much. You don't know these people, you haven't talked to them, you don't know what complexity lurks inside them. But I had a good feeling about some of these jurors, and I just didn't see them convicting them. When I heard there were unanimous verdicts, my gut feeling was it's going to be acquittal, but of course, you're nervous.
Yeah, you're always nervous when a verdict comes in. I would say the same thing in trial as well. It's very rare that as a defense attorney I would ever predict a not guilty verdict, but I agree that you can sometimes get to a place where, you're looking at the jury and you're sensing where they're at, and you usually do get a signal from 3 or 4 jurors that you feel very strongly about, and I've often felt the same way, that if a verdict comes back, it's going to be not guilty, but you don't want to go there because it is. You never really know what a jury's going to do.
Well, you had 2,200 accredited media from around the world. That's more accredited media than O.J. Simpson and Scott Peterson combined. It was probably the most watched trial and maybe the most watched verdict ever. Every capital around the world, people stopped to see what was going to happen to Michael Jackson. He was the best known celebrity on the planet. So it was a very media saturated event, a big moment, but I just have to be honest with you, deep down inside, I didn't see 12 people convicting him.
And did you feel that way because you looked at the jurors and you saw they were responding to you, or did you also feel that way because in your heart, Michael Jackson was innocent?
Probably
what
both.
Was motivating
Probably both. Yes. On one hand, I thought he was absolutely innocent of everything they charged him with, and I also thought we really chopped their case up very well. In fact, I had a real dilemma when the prosecution rested. We had so many good days in cross-examination that I had to decide whether to rest or whether to put on a case and assume the risks of putting on a case. And I really felt if we had rested when the prosecution rested, it would have been a hung jury. I didn't think we had really sewn up every little opening they presented. And I decided to put on a case, as risky as it was. And I later on talked to the jury foreman who said, by putting on a case, you seal the acquittals.
If you had to just focus on one or two major flaws in the prosecution's case, what would they be? What would be the one or two things that you think they couldn't win with that witness or with that piece of evidence?
I think the prosecution knew that this family of accusers had baggage. They had problems with credibility. I think the prosecution thought that by bringing in evidence of prior similar acts, and they sought to prove that 5 other young men were molested, and by bringing in evidence that he had settled cases, which the judge, to my surprise, allowed them to do, I think they thought that would seal the deal for them, that even if the family of accusers had flaws, the jury would overlook those flaws and convict them of something. And they were just trying to get one conviction. I don't think they expected that we would savage everybody, and we really did.
But wouldn't that also serve to backfire? Wasn't that like really a critical error by the prosecution? Because when you bring in these other accusers that you think are fortifying your case if you're the prosecutor, but in fact every single one of them has settled for a monetary value, doesn't that make the jury also think, well, maybe that's all this family's after too?
It was a little more
monetary settlement.
Little more complicated than that, because they tried to say that 3 young men were molested who had not settled for anything. And the judge allowed them to bring in third-party witnesses to say they watched them being molested without their having to bring in the actual alleged victims. I started my case with 3 of the 5 who said we weren't touched. The first one was Mr. Robson,
who now, just so that is now claiming that he was sexually molested and is trying to bring a civil action.
I just find that mind-boggling because, you know, when you put on a case, you want to start strong and end strong. And we had Wade Robson as one of our strongest witnesses. He was an absolutely intelligent, articulate, adamant supporter of Michael Jackson, said he was never touched, said it was ridiculous to even suggest that he was ever improperly touched. And I started the case with him because he was so powerfully for us. And to have him come out years later and say, you know, I really was molested, I didn't realize it, or whatever he's really saying, I don't quite know. I know his lawyers came out and said he had repressed memory, I'm told. And then I think he went on the Today Show and said it wasn't repressed memory. Whatever the explanation is, I find it mind-boggling that somebody who was this powerfully in favor of Michael Jackson at the time, and I didn't just call him, I called his mother and his sister, who traveled with Michael, who were strong supporters of Michael. I find it mind-boggling that he's now saying that he was improperly touched.
Do you have an opinion of what might be motivating him now?
Well, I can only speculate. I haven't talked to him since, you know, I called him as a witness. I have to assume that it has to do with money. He filed a civil suit for money. He filed a motion, as I understand it, with the estate in probate court, saying that he wants to be adjudged a late creditor in the probate proceeding.
See, and this is the same issue that we were talking about before, the fact that they bring the civil suit. It brings the fact that the estate has grown so much and that there's so much money at stake here, and that ever since Jackson's death, I mean, that they've made just, you know, cleaned up all the creditors, and that things are going so well fiscally that then you start to have, even although, I mean, when Howard Weitzman was on here, he said he started to tell us who was coming out of the woodwork even before this lawsuit. Then you have this big group. I mean, even one of the main witnesses from the sexual molestation trial who testified in Jackson's defense. I'm just curious, that was what Mike was trying to get at here, is that when did Catherine consider, and I said whether or not that this was going to bring out all of this again. I mean, things that, you know, Jackson, when he died, his reputation, they did focus a lot on the music. There was a lot of focus on the fact that he was one of the most celebrated and talented artists of the century. And now we're back to the conversation in 2005.
But then again, a mother could be haunted by not bringing a civil case to vindicate her son, to bring about justice against the people who she thinks, caused the death of her son. I mean, it's got different sides to it. Yes, there's an emotional cost to it. Yes, there's a cost in time and anxiety. But there's also the question of what you want to do to vindicate, the deceased.
Just based on your own knowledge of it, though, do you think it's fair to say that AEG actually caused Michael Jackson's death? I mean, didn't Michael Jackson on some level have some responsibility for this? Didn't he cause his own death?
No, I think if AEG, based upon documentation, emails, verbal statements, agreed to assume the risk of Conrad Murray either operating properly or improperly, that's their problem. They assumed it. And my understanding is that if you look at the emails, you look at the documentation, you look at the agreement their lawyers sent to Conrad Murray to sign, which did not say draft on it. It was a final agreement, which they wanted him to sign and which he did sign and sent back. If you put all of that together and you look at California law, which says you don't even need a writing to have an agreement, and look at their actions and how they behave with Conrad Murray and how they behaved in response to other people telling them he's ill, he's not well, if you put all that together, I think they assume the risk and they should be held responsible.
Okay. So would it be your position then, say, if Amy Winehouse had a contract with AEG during the time that she was in her addiction and the time that she died, that AEG would be responsible for not making sure Amy Winehouse didn't get the help for her addictions?
If AEG decided to pay the doctor, decided to supervise the doctor, decided to question what the doctor was doing and stay on top of the doctor, that's their problem, in my opinion. And that may be a risk they assumed in order to do business with Michael Jackson.
And I understand that from a legal standpoint, if they are employing the doctor, if they are paying the doctor, if they are supervising the doctor, they hold some legal liability. But
Correct.
From a human moral standpoint, do you truly believe that AEG is morally responsible for Michael Jackson's death instead of Michael Jackson being responsible for his death? This is a person who was using drugs, abusing drugs, knew that he was taking propofol, had to have known that it was at least somewhat dangerous. He hired the doctor. That was his doctor that he wanted.
Well, that's what you say.
That's what but that's the issue of
that's
the
what
case
you say. That's not what
him.
I think the documentation shows. The documentation to me shows that they decided to pay him, to supervise him, to provide equipment to him.
Who found him, though? Who found Dr. Conrad Murray? Who was working with him? Who established that relationship? It was Michael Jackson.
Well, suppose it was, and suppose AEG said, look, as one of our requirements for hiring you, for doing business with you, for launching the biggest entertainment comeback in history. We'll pay your doctor, we'll provide the doctor equipment, we'll, under the law, have to supervise the doctor. If that's a risk they took, they should be held accountable. Because they invested $30 million in Michael Jackson before the tours even began. They wanted to take risks to do business with the greatest entertainer on the planet. It would have been the greatest entertainment comeback in history. And if they agreed to supervise this doctor, hire him, retain him, monitor him, that's their responsibility. That's their problem. And my understanding is that's exactly what they did.
Okay, let's switch to Debbie Rowe. She's about to testify, and you're actually in a unique position to talk about her and her relationship with the family. And I'm curious because she's being called by AEG and supposedly is going, and we've heard this before because she actually testified for the prosecution, was called by the prosecution at Michael Jackson's sexual molestation trial and did not say what everybody was saying she was going to say. So this time, what they're saying she's going to say is that she's going to say that she knew that he was involved having some drug use, but she never knew the extent of his drug use, trying to bolster AEG's claim that it wasn't obvious to everyone that Jackson was engaging in, with the doctor in copious drug use, or really severe drug use. I'm wondering, what do you think she's going to say when she takes the stand? And I guess more importantly, what's her relationship with Katherine Jackson, because that probably will influence how she testifies.
Well, I don't know a lot about what Debbie Rowe is thinking at the moment, because I haven't talked to her in a long time. All I can tell you is what happened in the criminal trial. The prosecution thought she was going to be one of their strongest witnesses. They thought she was anti-Michael. She was helping the sheriffs with their investigation. They wined and dined her, brought her to the courtroom with great fanfare. The media was all over it. I was prepared with 20 binders of documents to cross-examine her. I had every document from their divorce. I had every statement she'd ever made, every newspaper article, every recorded interview, you name it, I had it in chronological order. I'd been through it a million times. I had every point I wanted to make identified. And I ended up not using one single document in my cross-examination of Debbie Rowe. She got to the stand, she looked over at Michael. I saw this look on her face of great affection and sympathy for him. She proceeded to testify that he was a wonderful father, a wonderful person, that he was being taken advantage of by people around him, and she just annihilated the prosecution. It got to the point where I wondered if I should even ask her a question on cross-examination.
Did you have a feeling that that was going to happen with her testimony? Had you been in touch with her at all prior to her testifying?
I had not been in touch with her, and she had been working exclusively with the prosecution as far as I knew.
She was going to be bad.
I thought she was going to be, the prosecution was making everybody think she was going to be bad. She was not communicating with us.
And she never reached out to you at all?
She didn't reach out at all. We reached out to her a little bit, and not much came back. So we assumed that she was in their pocket, that they were influencing her every way they could. They seemed to think she was going to tell them that Michael forced her to say certain things through the years.
Yes, right, and had done rebuttals on tape,
she
interviews.
Said that wasn't true,
yeah.
And she ended up she just boomeranged on the prosecution big time. I was very gentle in my cross. I saw how emotional she was, how sensitive she was towards Michael. And as I said before, every document in those 20 binders was unused. She really helped us a lot. She clearly had great affection for him, thought very highly of his character, very highly of his parenting skills. And I have only good thoughts about Debbie Rowe. Now, Catherine has said that she'd like to see Paris try and reach out to the mother and have a good relationship with the mother, and I think that's a fabulous idea.
Well, I understand that they are having a relationship now that she spends a lot of time
the pictures we've seen.
out there.
I mean, I don't know how.
And that's wonderful because
clearly they've met, but that's about all you know.
But here you are, you're a daughter, your loving father is gone, you're in your early teens. What's wrong with reaching out to the mother and trying to have a good relationship? That's a perfectly natural thing to do. I know I made a statement that I thought she should reach out to the mother, and I hope they had a good relationship, and I got some nasty emails from some people saying she wasn't a good person and all the rest, and I think that if the mother and the daughter can have a positive, constructive, loving relationship, whatever it ends up being, I think that's great for both. So I'm in favor of Paris talking to Debbie Rowe, and I hope it turns out to be a very positive, loving relationship. Because
do you think that she will support the family at this point, or do you have any sense whether or not, I mean, if Catherine is suggesting that Paris reach out to her mom, but is there any sense that she would support AEG? I mean, I'm skeptical now of whatever is written about what she's going to say, because I watched the first trial that you never know quite what she's going to say.
But the situation is different here than it was in your trial, because you could be denied access to Debbie Rowe. If she didn't want to talk to you, she wouldn't talk to you. In a civil case, if you subpoena someone for a deposition, she has to show up. So I would think that AEG has a far more clear sense of how she's beneficial to them, or what the problems might be
they may or may
you
not
could have without the benefit of a deposition.
They may or may not. They may be focusing on a minute portion of her testimony without fully appreciating the risks of opening everything up to cross. It's hard to tell. Trial lawyers, even bright ones, sometimes miscalculate when it comes to witnesses. So they have to think long and hard about whether what they're going to get on direct is worth what they may lose on cross, depending on how broadly the judge allows cross-examination to proceed. And generally the scope's pretty broad in these cases. So I've not been in touch with her. I don't know what exactly she's going to say. My sense is that she doesn't want to hurt Catherine or the children. I don't know why she would want to. I don't think she does at all. I don't think so.
Okay. I mean, I thought you were going to say that, because I don't see, she doesn't really have a history of being very cooperative with anybody, and she kind of like sort of
but again,
says whatever she wants to.
I think you want to focus on what the defense wants from her here. If what they really want from her is to establish a history of medication abuse of prescription medication, abuse of drugs in general, and that's all that they need from her, it might be really worth it for them to run the gauntlet of her being sympathetic toward Michael as well. Because they might say, fine, be sympathetic for him, but the history remains, the history of him being somebody who abuses prescription medication. And if that's all that they really want, and they feel like that simple fact will have the overarching power over any sympathy that she might have, they might still get what they need from her.
I think that they're expecting her to come up there and say that she didn't know the extent of his drug use, and that now she's found out that Dr. Klein was doing this and Dr. Klein was doing that.
Well, she knew then that Dr. Klein was doing it,
No, she said
though.
she didn't. She said that she
She
was
knew that he was-
unaware that the dermatologist, Dr. Arnie Klein, had a standing order when Michael came to the office that he should be injected with Demerol.
But she did know that he was getting medications from
Yes,
Dr. Klein.
but-
She knew that he was receiving medications from him.
So if she testifies that she didn't know the extent, I think the idea is to put in the jurors' minds that it wasn't Dr. Murray that killed him, but that Dr. Klein. So, you know, how did AEG know what doctors he was going to? Like trying sort of to muddle it up.
Well, it
Maybe
could go
that's
further
it.
than that, though. It could be to establish that people close to Michael, whether it's his mother or other family members or the mother of his children, were not aware of the extent of his drug use when we know he was using drugs. That they might use that simply to say that it's unreliable testimony simply because his family members or the people that care about him weren't noticing that he was using drugs, that he was abusing drugs. To me, that's an important fact for AEG.
I think we still go
that he has
back
a
to
history
who
of this
hired
abuse.
Dr.
Well,
Dr. Murray.
you keep saying abusing drugs. I mean, weren't doctors prescribing these drugs? Don't all of us use drugs when doctors prescribe them and tell us we need to take them? I mean, we may exercise some discretion. We may go to other doctors to get separate opinions. But the fact is, how can you keep saying he's abusing drugs when doctors are prescribing them and telling him he needs to take them?
Well, I
don't think it's just a one-sided
If
event.
Dr. Klein is now saying that he was giving him drugs on a regular basis, that he was over-medicating him,
No, Dr.
if there are
Klein's not
people that
saying
are
that.
testifying, but if there
I've
are
never heard Dr.
witnesses
Klein
that are
say that.
going to establish that, but I imagine that there are witnesses that would say that Michael Jackson, drank too much, used drugs, has this history of drug abuse. I'm not saying he is or isn't anything. I'm saying there are certainly suggestions out there that he was abusing drugs. And I think that that's how AEG would use it, that he has a history of abusing drugs and he has
we'll have to
Well,
wait and see. Yes,
my understanding is that both sides, the plaintiffs and the defense, have argued that Michael had a history of using prescription drugs, that AEG was well aware of it, that one of their executives had been his concert manager in the 90s and actually had hired a doctor to treat him for prescription medication, I don't know whether addiction, and that they were put on notice that he had a history of, because he was burned on his head at that Pepsi commercial, and because he had pain problems, that he had gotten addicted to prescription drugs,
Okay, then we
which
do have
other
a
people
history.
do all the time, and that he had been treated for it. So I think the plaintiff's argument is that they were on notice that he had some problems with addiction earlier to prescription medication, nothing illegal, and that he needed some treatment for it. And that because of that, they were on notice that they needed to hire the right physician. That's my understanding. My understanding is also that AEG, in some emails, made some admissions that they had investigated Dr. Conrad Murray, and then now are admitting they never really did that. So again,
But had they investigated
I think-
Dr. Murray, I think they would have found that he didn't have any history of discipline from the medical board. I don't think he has a history of having of anything like that. So even an investigation might not have
He had some
revealed
shady stuff in
that
his
he
background.
was.
I mean, they put it up in the criminal trial. I mean, I don't know the extent to which it's going to figure into the civil trial, but I want to switch the topic and talk about...
Let me just say one
Oh,
thing.
sorry, yeah.
I have not studied any of his medical records. I don't know what Dr. Klein did or didn't do.
Right.
I'm not giving an opinion on what some of these doctors did. And I think unless you really talk to Dr. Klein or other physicians and get their opinions on what they did, I don't think you can really have an idea, what problems Michael had, what's in his confidential medical files. That wasn't my role. My role was to defend him in the criminal case.
And I do think, just by way, so the audience should know, that Dr. Klein wasn't charged with anything. He's
And
out,
I haven't reviewed any medical records either.
Okay, so
I'm
we've
going
all
off of
put
what
our
I've read
disclaimers out
in
there.
articles and the internet.
Let's just say
I'm just
we're all
saying
caveated
what's out
up.
there.
Okay, it's all done. All right.